Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon & Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. Anthony Paluska and Dean McMahon. Today we are joined by Jeffrey Fidelman. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, both Anthony and Dean.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff is the CEO and principal of Fidelman Co, which is an investment banking firm for startups and funds. And Jeff, please explain a little bit more about your background and what your firm focuses on before we dive into the topic today.
Sure. So my background, I'll start from the beginning. I'm from the Northeast originally, from Long Island. I graduated Harvard. I spent the better part of a decade in banking. Half of that was at Morgan Stanley and the other half at HSBC. And while I was there, I was recruited to a family office to help them run a venture capital fund. I was a partner there. Our investment thesis was early stage tech and tech-enabled investments, where we would anchor the round and then help the founders syndicate the rest of the capital. And while there, I recognized that the venture banking didn't exist, while by design, there was a significant gap in the market. And 10 years ago, 2015, I started Fidelman Company to act as an investment bank specifically for early stage companies. And more recently, that has grown into working with a lot of fund managers, specifically emerging managers, but also third, fourth, fifth funds as well. And what we do for our clients is, on one hand, help them with all of their fundraising materials. So deck, model, valuation, capital structure, design, all of that is done in-house. We have about over 30 people that are all remote, all US and Canadian based. And on the other side is the capital raising. We took a little bit of a different approach or atypical approach to investment banking. We call it fundraise as a service, but it's effectively outsourced investment relations, where we subscribe to all the investment databases like PitchBook, Vintrix, Preqin, ZoomInfo, and a variety of others. We've aggregated them into a single CRM internally of a database, and then layer an analyst on top of that who does all of the outreach on behalf of our clients. So Alex calls from ABC Company, Alex emails from abc.com, and from the investor's perspective, it's the company that's reaching out to them directly as opposed to a third party. So I don't want to monologue, but that's a bit about me, what I do, and who we do it for today.
Great. And what's your typical organization that you support in terms of size, industry? Is there any specialty there? I know you talked about kind of your background previously, but what's the sweet spot for you now?
So early stage, I would categorize as raising anywhere from a C to a Series B. So okay. 1 to 5 million on the lower end, maybe 20, 30 on the higher end. And these are companies that are often either pre-product, pre-revenue, sometimes post-product, pre-profitability. And then towards the end of that scale or that bell curve, you get into profitable businesses. On the fund side, it's usually just multiples of 50. For lack of better terms. So 50, 100, 152, 250, $300 million raises. Again, most oftentimes it's the funds that don't have an internal investment relations team or any other means of doing kind of top of the funnel investor outreach or LP outreach. Industry-wise, we're very agnostic. Really what we do is a service as opposed to an outcome. So I don't sit with potential clients or clients trying to sell them on the 12, 30, 40 people I have in my phone book, but rather the system and processes we put into place. So as I mentioned before, the outsourced investment relations, we're reaching out on behalf of the company. And that's why from an industry categorization, or really even from a sizing perspective, it doesn't matter so much to us what technology or industry or fund size our client is in, as long as we can set up those systems and processes inside of their firm or inside of their fund and do the outreach.
Got it. Yep. Thanks for that. And so the topic we want to cover with you today, in kind of in preparation for this, and given our audience is right, we see a lot of consulting executives and professional services leaders that have because of the uniqueness of that role have kind of lived inside a larger organization and have owned everything that kind of the business inside of the business, and so they've built their own P&Ls, their own offers, their own go-to-market strategies, all of those things, and scaled these teams up. And so there's a lot of leaders or ex-leaders in that space that say, hey, I feel like I've run a business, but I've been captive inside of my other business, and I want to transition into some sort of form of entrepreneurship. It doesn't even have to necessarily be in the same space. So I have that belief. I feel like I have that background. You've probably seen lots of different people with all sorts of backgrounds be successful here. Just at a high level, kind of what advice would you give somebody that's in that situation that I described, that's exploring whether or not should I stay the corporate route, should I continue to work in this field, or should I pursue an idea or a passion that I have and start my own gig?
It's hard. It's really, really, really hard. And I say that because when I started this firm, it was a consulting firm for the first couple of years, first 5 years, so half its life, because we didn't want to get into fundraising. What we wanted to do was help companies put together all their materials, ultimately give them a fundraising strategy, and then have them go on their way. And it was really because of demand, consistent demand, and I'll go over in a moment, but demand of, hey, thank you for this fundraising strategy. It was super helpful. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have access to infrastructure. We don't have XYZ. So they came back to us after an engagement was over to say, can you do this for us? And that's ultimately how Fundraise as a Service was born. But if I'm rewinding 10 years when I was first starting this, it's hard to give hypothetical advice. So I'll just go over my own experiences. But when I was first starting this, yes was the answer. Now, what's the question? That's essentially how the first 2-3 years of this business were born. Whether it was go-to-market consulting, operation, help us write an operating manual, help us build a financial model or an investor presentation, help us with due diligence documentation. I knew my niche because of where I came from and my background and just access to network and potential clientele. But what it was and how I defined myself to provide those services really started to come together many, many years after I started this. And some of the things I wish I hadn't done, maybe looking back on it, was try to offer services that I couldn't do myself. And it was like a go-to-market strategy, for example, where maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, we started getting more clients. I was building the decks and models at first and then hired an analyst to do those things and train them on how to do that. But we had a lot of demand for go-to-market. We had a lot of demand for a variety of things because we were essentially the first call for a lot of our clients. And being entrepreneurial, I wanted to continue expanding and launching new service lines and providing that to clients. And what I recognized really quickly that unless you're part of a larger organization that has a reputation, or if you maybe bring the right people on, which is very, very difficult early on in a boutique nature, that you become beholden to a consultant that works for your firm to deliver something that you don't really have a lot of experience or knowledge about. And I learned very quickly that I should not be doing that and lean away, even from when there is significant demand, even if when a client is saying, I'll pay extra for XYZ. While that rarely happens, it will happen on a timeline of 0 to infinity. It's better to stay away from that. And now I can confidently say, and I do say oftentimes, that we're really, really good at what we do and we don't do anything else. So I think that's one of kind of the learnings that I saw there. And I think another one is that every I don't want to use absolutes. Many times that I've seen executives leave roles and go into independent contracting or independent consulting, usually have a pivotal point in that journey that they need to make a decision. And the decision is, am I doing this to get hired by another company who I'm consulting for? Or am I doing this to actually build a boutique practice in some way, shape, or form? And more often than not, I don't know about maybe recently, but over the past couple of years, over the past 10 years, regardless of what the answer was, more often than not, I've seen executives get hired successfully by the clients that they're working on, by one of the clients that they will be servicing, whether it's as a C-suite or business development or whatever the case may be. And I don't know that you necessarily need to make a decision until you come to that crossroads. But going off and really starting a boutique and really starting to do things on your own, all of a sudden has a different dynamic in terms of now it's my reputational risk. Regardless of what you call your company, you are the leader of the company coming out of it. So to tie back in what I said before, everything that you deliver, especially if you're hanging up your own flag, must go through you so that you maintain consistent quality. Otherwise, your reputation gets harmed, you don't get referrals, you don't get feedback, and it becomes a snowball effect, but in almost a reverse way.
Jeffrey, one of the questions, as a guy who started a firm 35 years ago, one of the questions I always talk to or hear from people, and this goes right into what you do, daily now, is, hey, I've got this idea. I'd like to have this service business, and I'd like to get funding to help it grow. And there are some reasons that people will fund a service business at certain times. You see the large accounting firms being funded now. Or if you think, hey, it's a size enough that it can self-grow if I take a piece. But and I want your opinion. What I often say is, if you're gonna have a pure play consulting firm, and that's great, and I hope you're successful, it's going to be difficult to get funding unless you embed something that has a different payoff, a different value prop, a product embedded. If you take our training business, it's a media business. So what are your feelings about that when people say that? And I don't mean to push back on them negatively. I just say that's going to be difficult to fund because you're really going to be eating all your corn through your consultants.
Oh man, what a great point. And I've seen that happen a lot, that consultants or executives or whomever start these consulting practices and then end up along the entrepreneurial journey creating this product. And I think that there's an incredible book. It's called Productize by Aisha Armstrong, I believe is the author's name. And I read it, and it really, I don't want to say it changed my life to that extent, but it really changed a lot.
Hey, you can say that. We can get very spiritual here.
TBD, it changed my life, but it really made me think about things in a different way, where in a service business, you're right, it's extremely hard to fund a pure service business because at the end of the day, you eat what you kill. And then if you ever want to sell your consulting practice, you're probably selling it for 1x or close to that revenue. And then you also have to stay on board to make sure there's proper handoff and all the clients don't fall off immediately after purchase. So in a consulting practice, just purely alone, whatever you would do as consultants, and I would include that like accountants, attorneys as consultants in terms of like boutique or individual practices as well, that it is you are your own asset. And essentially when you're done and you want to sell, you're selling the relationships you've built, but that's really it. There's not much more beyond that or beyond you. And there's this idea that there's actually 3 phases of productization, right? Service business is the first. Then you have it as a service offering. A service offering is something where, for example, like and I'll use myself an example, we had this consulting firm, custom to everyone, working on decks and models and valuations and all those deliverables. That is something that, to the best of my ability, I structured so that an actual engagement has a very similar workflow. But above and beyond that, it takes an incredible amount of human effort to actually do those types of things. Regardless of what AI is out there, it's not, where it really needs to be for these types of things. And the next phase is kind of this productization of a service offering. So that, in my mind, became what Fundraise as a Service is. All of a sudden, you as the consultant or as the partner or whomever, the rainmaker who's bringing in the business, has created this workflow that I am no longer necessarily required to be involved in on a day-to-day basis, right? So we present to the clients. I'm still there. I do the client and relationship management and advisory. But now on a day-to-day basis, I have the ability to to provide a workflow, this fundraise as a service. There's an analyst doing all the calls, doing all of the emails, doing all the sequencing, and it's effectively a service as opposed to an outcome. And that's the number one thing that all of a sudden the dynamic starts to change. If you're coming to me for a deck, I will do the deck, we will charge for it, but if there's unhappiness with that deck, we can always go back and tweak it and not charge additional time just to make sure our clients are happy. But that is based on an outcome. And now all of a sudden, when you start to productize these types of things, all of a sudden it is a service that your clients are buying from you as opposed to a specific outcome. And they could be tied to outcomes. Fundraise as a service is getting our clients in front of investors that are qualified and interested, but it's still the process that we're selling of the outreach and how we're doing the outreach. And the final stage of that is a full productization into a software or similar. And I think that right now, even with a lot of AI tools, not that they're displacing consultants necessarily, but I think the whole idea, and I read this somewhere, I can't remember where, that SaaS being defined as software as a service is dead. But SaaS, the acronym, remains alive, and it very much now is starting to mean service as a software. And that's where I think a lot of consultants in any category of industry can monetize and start having commercial relationships and products more and more. And we'll probably see that over the next couple of years. So this is a very kind of long way of, and I use myself as an example, and we're working on that as well. But as an individual consultant, or even as a part of a small boutique consulting firm, your value as an asset is you and some of the relationships you have, dependent on whether or not they'll continue with that firm after you're gone. And if you really want to raise capital, if you really want to be supported in growing something, you have to imagine that your investors want to make money, and that's why they're investing in you. So building an asset that can be sold, that can work without you, that isn't tied to you directly, is something you should be thinking about from day one. It's probably not something that you can build from day one, or oftentimes isn't, but it's definitely something that should be in the back of your mind as you're building, or after you've built a few years of your own practice, thinking, okay, I want this to be larger than myself. How can I productize what I've proven works? And I've always found that to be kind of the common denominator amongst many successful entrepreneurs, is that they don't just try to build it and see if they will come. They don't just try to build a product and see if somebody's going to use it, but quite opposite, they'll do the things manually and then slowly over time start productizing it or automating it.
I think it's really great the way you said, work it out, make it good. But the other thing I think is nice about not just getting fundraising and being able to monetize your business, a lot of people that want to get into consulting, even if they've done something inside a giant brand, are ill prepared for, and you had to live through this, ill prepared for how different it is. So I think if they begin, or at least early on, say, I'm going to your point, productize this. We think of it as I'm going to get a different revenue margin differential that may have longer tails or may have more margin, but I'm going to do that, and I'm going to focus on that, because eventually I'm going to take the pressure off, not just economically, but the level of quality I have to do to play. Mm-hmm. Right. And we, and a lot of people just are not going to make it and that's nothing against them. It's just a different skill set. And you got to feed your family, and you're in a different skill set, and you're not in a different skill set 8 months or 5 years from now. You're in a different skill set day one, and the buyers are used to that skill set.
Yes. And I would also add to that to say that, I mean, even fundamentally of every business, like there's two core points. You deliver your product or service, and then you have to originate business. You actually have to have distribution, right? Like who is buying your product or service, and then who is delivering your product or service. And those two need to be considered when you're opening up your own practice. A, who's going to do the work? If it's you, that's fine. That's probably why you're starting your own practice. But equally as important, A2 or B, I guess, is how are you going to get business, right? I'll never forget, and why to this day I never want to rely on a network, why we built Fundraise as a Service kind of off of this core belief that when I started at Morgan Stanley, We were in our induction class. I was 20 nothing years old, and we're sitting there, and the CEO of the time, Jim Gorman, walks in and kind of delivers this speech. I'll never forget it. It was really interesting. I don't even think he meant it to be this impactful, but it did impact me. And he says, everyone take out your phones. If I asked you how long it would take you to call every single person and have a 10-minute conversation in your phone book, how long would it take? Assume people are sick, they're on vacation, their kids are running around, they can't pick up the phone. If they're not calling you back in 3 or 4 weeks, they probably shouldn't be in your phone book. But that's it. After a month, you can speak with every single person you know for 10 minutes. Every single person you know. And then what? And it was kind of this whole idea that you should never rely on your network, and you should always have kind of this ability or system or process or workflow similar to your own practice of developing a business, of being able to not only sell your services, but get in front of the people who are, qualified buyers of that service.
Yeah. Very key. You've got to, as you said, I like it. We have to work how we get business and how we deliver business, which again, just because we're trying to talk about this more mathematically or predictably, it doesn't take the magic out of whatever service you have, whatever capability you have. But we're trying, and I love the way you said, we're just trying to take the naivete out of it, right? But also to go back to what you do daily, and we're very impressed with both the quality of what you do and your ability to bring somebody along, because there aren't many people, paid or not, that really can bring somebody along from you're not really there yet, and I can get you funding to get there, or you're performing but you're not performing in a transactionable way. Okay, tell me about the ideal, early formation business you guys like to see.
Ideal.
Well, one with lots of accounts and lots of money. It doesn't need you, but pays you anyway. No, I'm kidding.
Well, no, you know what? So it's funny. I'll take a step back and then I'll answer the question. And I read about these types of things, and I never thought I'd find myself in a position to actually say it out loud. I thought like people who said it were full of themselves and there's no real altruism or anything like that. But I can truly sit here and tell you that if everyone in our, related to us in a supplementary or complementary business to what we do, helping early stage companies or emerging managers raise capital, if everyone did it our way, the whole business would be better off. Not only them individually, but me walking into to a conversation with a potential client. And now every time I do, I get a black eye for a fight I wasn't in. They've all paid 20 grand in retainers. They've all gotten ghosted by advisors. It's always a black box that they turn around, and 30, 60, 90 days later, they get a spreadsheet of every single investor they contacted passed. And by the way, they're all doing the same thing after 30 or 60 days. It's just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So this isn't something that I could have said 4 years ago or 5 years ago or anything like that. It is relatively recent. And again, it's a decade old business. So it took time to get there. But I think working on it from the perspective of quality of I'm doing the right thing, I will do right by others, and it doesn't always, it's not always reciprocated. But if you consistently do that and consistently show up and do the right thing, then that just starts building on itself.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a focus on the outcome that you're shooting for, especially in those early stages where you're trying to find what to productize, right? Mm-hmm. Focusing on the outcome that you're generating, and then the activities necessary to drive to that outcome, and just keep showing up every day and telling that story and doing that wins over so many potential buyers in the market and gets you the referral network that you need to actually grow and sustain the business, because you just, there's so many, and we run up against it in our line of work and all sorts of stuff. And there's so many that well-intentioned and the right answers, right, or the right outcomes that they're shooting for, but not the follow through, not the execution, not the delivery, whatever that is, right? There's something that's always missing from some of that. And whether they're in it for the long haul or whatever the reason behind that is, it's amazing that, if you play the long game like that, you start to see this is actually the way that it works. And now I can tell the story, like you just said, of how we can differentiate ourselves from others, because I've seen everybody struggle through it. And yeah, you have to show up a couple of times, and you carry the battle or the scars of everybody that came before you, even though you weren't there. But I think especially as you go on that journey from providing services all the way to productizing those services, you kind of have to, right? Just as long as you're committed to the outcome that you're shooting for, you end up far ahead over the long haul.
Well,
Right.
also, Jeff, I mean, when you enter a market that has a lot of low quality providers, and no offense, years ago when we were young, we started an executive recruiting firm for consultants for the big firms.
Okay.
And we did it because all our clients and everybody couldn't find anybody who was any good. Well, all we did was do it right. And then we did it, we built it, we sold it. Right? I mean, it was great, but all we did was do it right. And that's what you're doing is there's a reason that someone running a business can't work the two phases of funding. One, getting prepared to talk to the market, and then telling the market the story so that you're sifting through who is reasonable to meet with. And now you're ready to meet with them. I know it doesn't sound like that's hard, but that takes real dedication and process.
It does. And to answer your question, I think I even glossed over it, like the types of clients we like to work with. It's what we do. I think what most, I'll keep it broad and then I'll go specific. I think what most consultants do is offset a intellectual capital gap. If I say it again in a very, very broad strokes way. And really what that means is that there's probably an element of economics involved and also an economics of just intellectual capacity, not capacity, rather capital. So they know something I don't know. I'm going to pay them for the information that they know and give it to me and apply it to me in my way. And specifically with fundraising, they always say fundraising is a full-time job. And the reality is that so many founders out there are so good at what they do. It just doesn't happen to be putting together a pitch deck and creating a narrative for an investor, which is absolutely fine because they're great at whatever else they're doing, building a company, developing real estate, whatever it is that they do. So really, what I see as my value to a lot of clients is not even giving them information, but rather asking questions that I know investors will be asking at the same time. So at the very least, we can do a deck. Yes, we can do a model. Yes, it's probably better with us because we have it all in-house as opposed to you going to one person for the deck and a separate third party for the model and et cetera. But really, with having a cohesive process and workflow internally, but also in talking with the fund manager, with the founder, and asking them the hard questions that investors would ask them. And I think that's really, like, again, from our value perspective and with the types of companies we work with, it's early stage companies. And funny enough, it's either first-time founders or serial entrepreneurs. And there's very little in between. First-time founders don't know what they don't know and they need help. Serial entrepreneurs know exactly all of that and absolutely don't want to do it.
Right.
Because it takes time, it takes effort, it's bandwidth. And just from an economics perspective, if you subscribe to PitchBook, it's an annual subscription for $30,000+. Then you have to think about, okay, founder is going to sit there and pound the phones all day, and you can't just send 1,000 emails a day or a week. You have to be personalized. You must be specific and have a conviction around the investor's philosophy or their investment thesis. And most founders just don't have time for that. If they do, they're taking valuable time away from their business. So then they hire an analyst, whether it's part-time, full-time, what have you. And between those two, and you have to hire an analyst for a year, there's a salary, there's onboarding, there's payroll taxes and benefits. And basically, we saw that was what was really preclusive to a lot of our clients in order to raise capital. So that's essentially, from a business first, that's what we did. We hired the analyst, we bought all the subscriptions to all these platforms on an annual basis, and then we fractionalized it so we can offer it to our clients on a month-by-month basis.
Yeah.
And not to mention that because we do it on a month-to-month basis, we are at the whim of our performance. If we're booking calls for our clients that are qualified, that are interested, our clients will continue to retain us because we're doing what we said we were going to do, regardless of whether or not they are able to raise capital. And I'll say this one more point and I'll stop talking about it, but that's how we measure risk as well. And a lot of companies will say, we want to pay a success fee, or we don't want to pay a retainer, or whatever the case may be. And I look at that as my risk. My risk is paying for PitchBook and Preqin and ZoomInfo and all those other platforms. My risk is paying for infrastructure. My risk is paying for the analyst salary. Those are my risks as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. Like, those are the risks that I'm taking on from a monetary perspective. I will get my clients in front of qualified and interested investors, but I'm not the one pitching their deal. So I absolutely will not be willing, and I am not willing to take on the risk of someone else closing on capital. Yeah. And that's, again, why we positioned the business the way we did, was that I am in complete control over our offering. Whether or not one of our clients closes on capital is completely out of my control, and it's just not something that I'm willing to take on either as a risk or just as a business decision.
Wouldn't you say, though, in addition to that, because eventually you would like more of them to get capital than less?
Of course.
Yeah, of course. You wouldn't be doing this, or you'd be living on the street or in my spare house. But so you do have to do some weeding on the front end.
It's more of advisory on the back end than weeding on the front end. I would put it that way, right? Because I don't necessarily, first of all, we don't take reputational risk because we are not reaching out to investors, right? It's Alex from ABC company or Gabe from XYZ company. It's not Jeffrey from Fidelman Co. trying to solicit an investor. But we do take an advisory fee as well. And frankly, the retainer covers infrastructure and the advisory fee is where the firm makes money. So there's a lot of hand holding. We have weekly calls with our investors. I'm on all of those calls. We have weekly reports. With our clients. We have weekly reports to all of our clients. We share all the data with our clients, and we make sure that they do have some sort of follow-up structure because, yes, at the end of the day, we are incentivized by them closing on capital. But we're also charging significantly under market at 2%, where every other advisor is trying to charge 8, 9, 10%. Because of that question, because they know how hard it is in the market, and they know that they're just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So yeah, sure, 1 out of every 100 hits at 8%, it makes a lot of sense for them. Maybe.
I like the balance of that and everything. Anthony, before we ask Jeff to give us some really great takeaways, did you have another question?
Yeah, just one final one, kind of talking about the advisory services that you would provide on the back end and how you would coach and advise a founder that is seeking funding or had just received some funding on kind of what to do with that in order to get the scale and the growth that they're ultimately looking for. And I think that this applies not only to clients of yours or clients that are prospective clients of yours, but also, hey, if I'm self-funding this and I'm paying this into it's my own firm and I'm trying to figure out the right way to allocate my own scarce resources for growth, or if I'm running a professional services team inside a large company and I'm having to allocate scarce corporate resources for this. So as you think about kind of these early stage services-based organizations primarily, where, people are so important in this whole process, where would you advise them to spend their capital on getting the best ROI for scalability? And what things would you suggest that they measure and monitor in terms of, are we making progress against some of these goals?
I am a big believer in applying scientific method in some way, shape, or form to anything that you do in a business. And what I mean by that is you have a hypothesis, you have a control and a variable, you run an experiment, you receive a conclusion, and then based on that conclusion, you do it all over again. And what I mean to say by that is anything that you do in business in terms of marketing, and again, barring outlier situations where like the roof is on fire or anything like that, you should run it for 60 to 90 days, whether it's a marketing campaign, whether it's an outbound email campaign or whatever, just so you have enough data to actually make a decision. If you're doing something for a week and it doesn't work, that's not enough data. That's not enough time to actually consider that a failed experiment or consider that, something that we need to change. Because if you change it, what I can say categorically, and again, I hate using absolutes, but what I have seen and what I will say categorically is that if you change a process every single week, regardless of if you found the right one, it will fail. That process will fail if you change something every week. So I think number one, it's important to whatever it is that you do, you give it enough time with money, you give yourself enough budget that even if it doesn't work right away, you have the ability or you have the budget to let it run for a little while longer to make sure that you're making an educational, a data-based decision on whatever it is that you're running. Now, where they're spending their money, I mentioned not a go-to-market strategist, so take this with a grain of salt. Depending on the services business you're in, sometimes digital advertising will work. I have a partner or we have a partner of the firm who said something really interesting. He said, I don't remember what he called it, 100 partner list, 100 referral list or something like that, where his goal is basically to build and grow a partner or referral list up to about 100 people. And then every 6 to 8 weeks, he has a touch point with them, like a virtual meeting or a cup of coffee or a cocktail or something like that. And it's definitely something that since speaking with him, I've begun to implement, and that's been working very, very well. And when you think about, economics of that, I'm a little bit more old school. Like somebody sends us some business and doesn't have a referral agreement with us, they're getting a bottle of scotch or wine or vodka or something like that, or olive oil, depending on whether or not they drink alcohol, right? Like I think a little bit goes a long way. And with services businesses, I would be hesitant to give the advice to anyone to just go throw money at digital advertising before you actually are able to build a base. Like go local. There are a zillion different events out there now that, like, depending on your geolocation, if you're close to a major metropolitan area, there's probably one every single day, if not multiple a day. There are virtual events. There are, again, partners. There are all these third parties out there that you can look at your alumni network, look at all this. And all of that, despite being time consuming, is relatively inexpensive. So I think that's really where it should start. And then also look at your competitors. What are they doing? What are they doing successfully to get clients in? And try to replicate that. Like now is probably the most straightforward time than it ever has been before to just go into GPT and say, here, find a list of my competitors. How are they spending their money on business development? And would that be applicable for my business? At the very least to start. So do research before you start spending significant money on anything. And when you do, give yourself budget to actually collect the data required to make an informed decision at the end of that experiment.
No, I like that. I like the concept of research, and your first point being let's just take one or two things at a time, right? Don't try to change everything all at once where all the outputs conflate with one another and you don't actually know which one drove the outcomes or the lack of success maybe, and make sure that you're measuring it and giving it enough time to actually see some results of it and setting some clear goals and expectations on the front end. I like the guidance there. So you've been gracious with your time. If you could leave us and the audience with one or two summary points from the discussion today, what would those be?
Best practices are best practices, at least applied to my business around fundraising. If there was a silver bullet, somebody would have found it at this point and implemented it, and then this whole process would be worked out. And they haven't. So I think that for sure, maybe one day there is, for anyone who's listening there, for their business, for whatever that is blocking and tackling. But the reality is, and this is how I pitch ourselves all the time, like nothing we do is proprietary. And I know that's very taboo to say, but I still say it anyway, because what we do are basically, if you Google what best practices are for raising capital, that's what we do. The economics make more sense for us. Maybe our database is now proprietary because of all the information we have over the years. But if there are a set of best practices for whatever it is that you are doing or looking to do, there is probably something to that you should take very, very seriously, and at minimum implement those as your initial experiment, so to speak, or data collection. And then if that doesn't work, try to look to other mediums of communication or getting done what you want done. So best practices exist for a reason. I'm a big fan of moving quickly and breaking things, but at the same time, there's a reason that they're best practices. So I like to tell my clients the same thing, that we follow best practices. It's a good idea too, because that's what has been proven to work over years, decades, or however long.
Well, Jeff, really appreciate it. Thanks again for coming on here and sharing some of your insights and lessons learned through your own journey and through your clients' journeys with us and the audience today. So,
and we'll have you back. We really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you both so much for having me. It was really, really good experience.
Well, Jeffrey both was fascinating for two reasons. One, he's lived through consulting firm to productize consulting to a product offer that allows him to scale his business. And everybody should be really interested in how he did that. But secondarily, I really like that he can provide advice on if you're doing that, you need to have a productized thing and you need not to, as we have so many people we know have ended up at late in their career with a good monetary journey, maybe, but unable to end it well or get out or transact it. So I thought he was and everybody should be, anybody interested in it, as you said, should reach in and think, hey, should I have somebody advising me along the way to get to a productized or transactional version of myself?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably more services organizations out there in the world today than there's ever been before, and I mean, everybody that you talk to is they all believe that there's some value, and I think rightfully so, right? Some value that they can add on a topic or a kind of a subject matter that they've developed some expertise on over the years. And to his point, right, some of them are, whether they've decided that or not, are doing that as a stepping stone to ultimately take another job in the corporate environment. But for those that have committed to this being a serious journey for them of saying, I want to be a services provider, I want to grow and scale this business, and I want to grow this business beyond just my own capacity to sell work and deliver work. Following some of the pretty practical steps that Jeff laid out, I think is very useful, right? Following the journey of productization of things, beginning with a little bit of saying yes to everything, because that's the nature of it as you're working your friends and family network initially as you're doing that. But then really focusing on, okay, what do you do and why do you do it better? And his parting comment on best practices, right? A bit of the, you don't have to have the revolutionary idea necessarily. You just, execution on the best practices goes a really long way, because in most of these markets, the market is big enough to handle lots of different suppliers of services. And so knowing your niche, focusing on that niche, and then getting funding where appropriate to scale the business to meet those needs is, I think, all great takeaways for everybody out there.
Yeah, and we'll have him back, and just a super warm guy. Matter of fact, after we were all off, we're near his office often, and we'll get together more often. So Anthony, bring us home.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this conversation today and would like to hear more like that, like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube and your favorite podcast network. If you want to connect with Dean or myself, you can easily reach out to us on our LinkedIns, or you can always email the podcast at podcast@consultantsway.com. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.